Alright. Welcome, beloved members, and those who are advocates for our temple. Thank you for attending or listening to the third sermon of the Temple of the Lotus Ghoul. Today, we will be talking about the nature of entities, the properties of energy, and things along that nature. Now, should anybody have a question about this, all you have to do is type in general, "I have a question," and I will get to you the moment I'm done finishing my thought. To begin, does anybody have any questions? No? Then let us begin. First, we will be talking about the property of energy. Now, with energy, we can start off with the highest element, Azoth. Azoth. Consider it like the fifth element, the baseline. It can then be divided into many different types of energy. We have the four basic elements everyone should be familiar with: earth, wind, fire, air, or water. Sorry. Then we have to look at energy polarity. And when I say polarity, I mostly mean positive or negative. For example, positive fire is healing, purifying, whilst negative fire is hungry, dominating. And in a way, that can be also brought up into entities. Entities of yin and the fire element would be referred to as infernals, with many of our infernal divine being as such. You can also view many jinn as yin-based fire entities. And then you have positive fire. Things like the mythical phoenix, or a celestial general built on the fire element. Though most celestial generals prefer the lightning element, which lightning is a combination of air and fire. And then, of course, there's neutral polarity. But a neutral fire is simply that, fire. Neutral water is water, so on and so forth. Most things on the material plane exist in this neutral state. Whilst men tend to have more yang, and women more yin, we carry both energy types within us, both positive and negative, much like the effect of humans on nature. So, let us get to entities. Let's start off with some of the most basic and some of the entities you really should consider use. Oh, yes, Yang. You can ask your question out loud. I just wanted the hey, I have a question part in general.
Let's say, hypothetically speaking, okay, so first, you mentioned that yin energy is more prominent in women, and wait, was it the opposite of that?
No, that is correct. Yin energy
Okay,
is
yeah,
more prominent.
yin more prominent in women, and yang more prominent in men.
Yes.
does that tie in particularly with anything to do with like masculinity or femininity?
In a way, yes. So, how to describe it? The amount of energy we have in our body and its polarity has a lot to do with the effects on our psyche. For example, you could take testosterone as a almost chemical representation of yang energy. It increases that masculinity, but too much of it will cause damage. Remember, in what I teach and what the temple teach is all about balance. Whilst yang energy helps promote the growth of muscles, helps promote physicality, that does not mean one should abandon their yin energy in fear of becoming more feminine. For yin energy has its many purposes, including, but not limited to, aiding in the destruction of those muscles, nurturing the body, and it helps with protective forces. Yang, I feel like you have another question.
You say you shouldn't fear yin energy because you say you shouldn't fear that yin energy will turn you more feminine, but in theory, and this is just hypothetical, in theory, could yin energy, if used properly, help you to become more feminine?
Yes. Especially if you
also,
direct that yin energy directly into your brain.
So it does work like hormones?
In a way. It affects your hormones.
I have one more question, and then you're free to move on. So I know someone with a hormonal imbalance. It's a guy with a hormonal imbalance, like a massive hormonal imbalance, to the point where they have the inability to grow facial hair. Hair on their body grows a lot less, and they have like really long hair. And their voice is also like incredibly feminine. That's just how they've always been because of the massive hormonal imbalance. Would you say that they produce more yin energy than yang energy?
I would say that their physique has a natural inclination towards yin energy. And they probably have more baseline yin energy than the typical male.
Okay. That's all for now on this subject.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions before I move on? Alright, then we shall proceed. First, we'll be talking about an entity type that I don't typically recommend. Now, the least of this subject, I think can be worked with minimal harm. However, anything past the least of them should be avoided. This is something me and Yang Ming had discussed over in general chat prior. Fae. Now, the Fae are an interesting sort. You can consider them a more earth-based spirit. They're spirits of nature. Nature, typically being a combination of earth and water. However, they are nowhere near only relegated to those elements. For example, the highest of the Fae, the Queen of Air and Darkness, is just that. A yin entity based around air, who rules over the Fae. Many of the Winter Fae have elements of air. After all, what is colder than negative wind? A almost malicious wind at that. Now, when you get into the least spirits, you're dealing with spirits. Now, many things will be considered spirits, but in this regard, when we speak of spirits, we're speaking of the least variety. This can be anything from dewdrop fairies from the Fae to human spirits bound to the earth, to even some lesser demons, the nameless cohorts ordered by the lords. Many celestial officers are also along this category, essentially relegated to paperwork in the Imperial Dynasty. Next, you have Household Divine level spirits. This is things like earthbound demigods before they ascend, or, in the example of Roman society, home-based deities. Small, minor deities only worshipped in a single home or a small group of homes. This is the typical stopping point for an egregore. However, should an egregore spiral past that, it can become a much, much bigger problem. Next, we will get into what I would call lower divine. Now, ranking the divine from lower to upper is a little, well, pointless. Their powers shift and change. The best and only real example of this would be the lower ranked nobility, per se. So, if a demon were to call itself a baron or a knight, it would be considered along this category. Celestial soldiers, the works. They're slightly more powerful than Household Divine, but past that, there's not a whole lot to them. Next, we get into proper deities. This is the majority of the deities we work with. Deities like Marduk, so on and so forth. Next, we get into old gods. Old gods are things like... which one would be a good representative of this? You could think of the old gods like titans, such as Prometheus. No. Akaru had asked whether Ymir or Tiamat would be good examples of old gods. Ymir maybe. I'm not entirely familiar with Ymir, but Mother Tiamat would be a primordial. Beings that are older than old. The example of the eldest of beings. And we have... Actually, that's currently a debated subject, the difference between old and elder gods. For example, let's actually go a little bit at the top here. Primordials. You have entities like Mother Tiamat, her husband, Gaia, Uranus, beings like that. From there you have the elder gods, which act as titans. My apologies for the confusion about titans being old gods. Mistake of mine. Titans on the level of elder god. Things like Ishtar, Enki, so on and so forth. The old gods would be their children, such as Marduk and so on. And then the gods would be the gods born of them. Does that make sense to everybody? I'll have to ask forgiveness. This is my first time attempting to explain it on from the lowest to the top. So I got a little confused. Now that we understand roughly now we'll move on into how the energy types affect entities. So, most of the time, entities based in this realm would be considered neutral, like human ghosts, the lesser fae, and so on and so forth. And then you start getting into categorizations. Now, when we use the term demon, we could be referring to one of two groups, the infernal and the abyssal. The best way to tell the difference is infernals tend to be fire-based. You can remember this via the inferno, whilst being primarily yin-based as well. Whilst the abyssals being yin-based and water-based. Now, there are entities that break this mold. Things like Lord Sabnok, who is more of a earth-based being than a fire-based being, while still being technically along the infernal divine. But you can tell them mostly based off their closer yin presence. What some might describe as a dark or mysterious feeling. And then you have yang-based beings, celestials, where you have your celestial generals, Queen Ishtar, Queen of the Heavens, Enki, so on and so forth. Neither set of entities is better than the other. Both are very important in their place in the cycle. That must always be remembered. You must balance. You must maintain balance. Not just with the energies, but in your opinion of the gods. For example, we do not hate the demon that brings plagues. After all, do you hate a tiger that hunts for its food? Do you hate the storm that blows by just because it happens? And instead of hating this entity, seeking to drive it away, which will only cause it to curse you, instead you should seek appeasement. Give it an offering. Ask it to leave you and your family alone. Or, barring that, maybe even ask it to visit one of your enemies. And something to remember. Not every celestial is good. Do not conflate yang with good and yin with evil. Petty morality has no place here. The moment you ascribe a certain thing as evil, you have given it a sense of power. The moment you ascribe something as good, you grant it a sense of power. And in these senses of power, you leave yourself up for misinterpretation and punishment. Now, we also have a class of entity we refer to as parasite. This kind of entity simply takes. They do not produce nor give anything. We have a few examples of parasites that I will not mention their names, but I'm willing to guess you all understand who it is. And should you not, Judeo-Christianity, Islam. The entities of those are parasites. They simply take. Does anybody have any questions thus far? No? Okay. And then I will talk about the energies in yin and yang forms, and the different presences and effects they may have. Let's start with yin. A yin fire is a demonic flame, hungry, chaotic. A yin water is poisoned, stagnant water, waters of the abyssal depths. Yin air is plagues, riding along the storms, disease, microbes floating through the air. And yin earth, cracked, erosion, so on. Then we will get into yang properties. Yang fire, healing, purifying. Yang water, rejuvenating, growth. Yang earth, creation, build. And yang air, mostly healing and purification as well, though different in the approach from fire. Now, these also have other properties that I wish for you to explore on your own. After all, the more you explore on your own, the deeper of a connection you're going to build. And with that deeper connection, you might find paths and opportunities that I cannot foresee right now. Remember, experimentation is the mage's friend. And I don't think I need to explain what fire, earth, air, and water is in the neutral sense, do I? Good. Well, should you have no more questions, I will end the sermon. But please, ask any questions if you have them. Alright. This will conclude the third sermon of the Temple of the Lotus Ghoul. I appreciate you all showing, and I cannot wait for the next one. We thank the Divine. Thank you. Aken.